Thank you so much for joining us for our last webinar of our free 8-week webinar series. It's been quite the journey, and thank you so much for riding it with us. My name is Ellie Borden. I'm a registered psychotherapist and author, and the clinical director and founder of the Mind by Design coaching and psychology clinics. Tonight, I am bringing you a topic that affects everyone at some point in time in their lives. 2020 has definitely presented that for us. Tonight, Fatemeh is going to be presenting on worry and fear of the unknown. That is quite a topic for us to be finishing on. So I'm going to leave that to you, and always, I'm going to have a freebie at the end. But tonight, we're finishing off extra strong, and we have something extra special for you. So, without further ado, Fatemeh.
Hello and welcome to the webinar series by Mind by Design. My name is Fatemeh Hamzaviabedi, and I'm a registered psychotherapist qualifying. I have been working as a therapist for 9 years and have had the opportunity to help hundreds of individuals and couples, help them overcome the difficulties and create more meaningful, satisfying lives. So today we are going to talk about managing your worries and the fear of unknown. And I myself certainly need to talk about worries, especially in these days that we all hear that the second wave of COVID has reached Ontario. There are so many new cases, and we don't know what future has for us. So now let's take a look at what we are going to talk about today. First, we are going to turn around and look at the uncertainties that we have faced in the past few months. Then we are going to talk about the evolutionary roots of fear of unknown. So in this part, I'm going to talk about our brain and how it has evolved to feel emotions, especially anxiety and fear when faced the unknown. And although the fear of unknown is completely natural, some of us cannot move forward and get trapped in a somehow paralyzing state. That's why we are going to talk about the mental and behavioral habits that create a vicious circle and do not let us process our emotions and move forward. Excessive worrying, cognitive distortions, and avoidant patterns are three of well-studied mental and behavioral habits that create this vicious circle and keep us in fear. After that, I'm going to give you some new tools so you can deal better with these worries, cognitive distortions, and avoidance. And last, and this is my favorite part of the webinar, I'm going to talk with you about a new approach to life. So, curiosity helps us have a more positive approach to life and be able to handle uncertainties much better than other habits. So, now that we are all on board, I'm going to review the most common worries of 2020. In the past 7 or 8 months, most of us have worried about our health and safety, our loved ones, our jobs, our children's school, and even how to find toilet papers. I remember reading articles after articles to just have a sense of how dangerous the situation is. There were so many confusing findings and information. It is unbelievable that how many contradictory hypotheses and advices were circulated by esteemed organizations and research centers. They would ask, is it a real global danger or just an overreaction to the flu-like sickness? How contagious and lethal is the new coronavirus? And for example, how long the virus lives on different surfaces. Even the World Health Organization first declared that there is no need for those of us who do not work in medical centers to wear masks. And then, a few weeks later, researchers were finding that wearing masks is the most successful way to slow the spread of the disease. We are still in a state of uncertainty. We don't know. Are we going down another economic depression? Are we ever going back to live normal? And the question that has come up so many times, when will the vaccines come? So in this time of deep uncertainty, it's really important to have a better understanding of how our brain and body has been evolved and how are they wired to respond to the unknown. So we can make decisions based on knowledge and we can create habits that help us become more healthy and resilient. So why did I start with evolutionary roots of fear? Why does it matter? Well, because on a daily basis, we have to grapple with a great amount of contradictory messages about how to deal with our emotions. And some of these messages make us think that we are defective or weak for how we feel. There is a culture of self-image management that associates success and even value to looking constantly joyous and upbeat. There is nowhere better than Instagram to watch manufactured images of constant joy. These messages might make us feel ashamed for feeling anxious or sad, even when situation is most amenable to feeling anxious and sad. So what I want to tell you is fear is not a defect or a moral vice. It is part of our evolutionary heritage, and it helps us survive in the face of unknown dangers. How does the fear help us survive? I'm going to explain to you in a few seconds. So as many of you might know, Charles Darwin not only wrote on the evolution of species, but also was a pioneer in proposing that we are evolved to have emotions, because emotions play an important role in animals and humans' survival and reproduction. Emotions allow us to communicate, cooperate, and compete with each other in a close-knitted group. They help us explore our environment, fight or flight dangers. And how do they do this? Well, first, emotions provide short circuit for response in critical times. When we pass an intersection and suddenly a car appears rushing toward us with, 60 miles per hour speed, we don't have any time to analyze the car's speed, its distance with us, and the best way to react. Fear helps us jump out of the way in a millisecond. So, it helps us exactly in the same way as it helped our ancestors flee from a tiger with all their might. It's also emotions like love that drive parents to go through any hardship to take care of their children, and in this way guarantee its survival and growth in the first years. It's also love, philanthropy, and empathy that enables people to cooperate with others and enhance the chances of group survival. Last but not least, facial and bodily expressions of emotions let us acquire an understanding of other people or animals' probable actions and hence adjust our actions in a way to improve our safety. For example, if we see our boss with a big skull and pursed lips, we know he might be prone to acting unkindly. So we try to be more cautious around him. In the same venue, when our ancestors faced a hissing, spitting, clawing animal, they could make an educated guess that it is probably going to act aggressively. So they adjusted their behavior to keep safe and survive. So now let's go a little deeper. Again, as most of you might know, for a very long period of time, at least 90% of human species lifetime, humans have lived in small hunter-gatherer groups. The consensus among most anthropologists is that from the dawn of human species in the way we know it, I mean Homo sapiens sapiens, in 200,000 years ago, until 10,000 years ago, when the first agricultural revolution happened, humans lived in groups of several families in low-density forests and productive open habitats. They spent their time moving from one place to another, setting up their shelters, collecting eggs, nuts, fruits, and seafood, beside hunting, games, and producing specialized tools like fishing nets, spears, and carving tools. So, knowing the details about the environment in which prehistoric humans lived help us understand what kinds of problems they had to solve day to day, and so how our brains have evolved to solve these problems. Going back to the fear of unknown, just imagine our ancestors have just moved to a new forest. They cannot find delicious berries that they used to eat in their former state, so they are looking for edible things. They find some beautiful big yellow mushrooms. If they eat this unfamiliar mushroom, it could prove to be a new source of food, but it also could have poisoned them. Foraging through new lands, finding food, and staying safe needed a delicate balance between exploration and caution. So, curiosity and fear of unknown were two intrinsic factors that motivated us to explore cautiously and safely. And these two approaches were kind of contradictory, so when we were afraid, we were not so much curious. And when we were curious about exploring our new habitat, we did not feel much fear. Of course, being on the side of caution, we can see how fear of unknown takes priority over curiosity because, well, most of the time, and some people might even argue almost always, in our ancestors' lives, staying alive was the matter at hand. And staying alive is much more important than finding a new source of food. What is crucial to understand is that our brains have evolved in those times when we faced lethal dangers. But now, in modern days, what we daily encounter is not about death or life. And this mismatch between the evolutionary environment and the modern life has introduced some problems into our life. I'm going to dig deeper in that in a few moments. So, a brief recap. In the majority of human lifetime, people were dealing with matters of life or death on a daily basis. In these cases, they needed a fast way to decide what to do, and they couldn't afford weighing pros and cons of, for example, running from a roaring animal or fighting it. Emotions, especially fear, provided them with this fast processing. Emotions did not always produce the best choice, but they did help make optimally adjusted decisions. And now, the problem we have in our modern society with chronic stress and affective disorders is mostly due to the mismatch between evolutionary environment and modern life. So let me talk about a difference between evolutionary environment and modern life, what we call immediate return environment versus late return environment. Hunter-gatherers had problems that would be solved in a small period of time. So for example, if they faced a tiger, either they were able to flee from it, They could kill it, or they would have been eaten. So the stress, the adrenaline that has been rushing through their veins would have only be present for minutes, hours, or in rare cases, days. But in our modern society, we can have stress about a new project for not only days, but weeks and months and even years. So our body has evolved to deal with, the hormones of stress like adrenaline and cortisol for a short amount of time. In our modern life, when we have to face the stress for a longer period of time, our body becomes tired and our immune system becomes weak in the face of these chronic situations. What is an immediate return environment? An environment in which problems can be solved in a small period of time and will lead to consequences in a matter of hours or days. But our modern society is a late return environment. So we need to be persistent in our attempts to solve the problems for days and weeks, and then the consequences might become visible after even months and years. Okay, let's talk about today's situations, and the mental and behavioral habits we use to deal with fear. I'm going to talk about 3 well-studied habits that produced difficulties for our mental health: worry, cognitive distortions, and avoidance. A well-accepted definition of worry says, worry is a chain of thoughts and images, negatively affect-laden and relatively uncontrollable. It represents an attempt to engage in the mental problem solving on an issue whose outcome is uncertain but contains the possibility of one or more negative outcomes. Consequently, worry relates closely to the fear process. And if worrying becomes a default pattern, a habit, it can be part of what we call GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. So let's go through the characteristics of worry. First, it is a chain of thoughts or images. It's not just one independent thought or image. It's usually repetitive. So we can repeat the same train of thoughts and the same images over and over and over. It is related to the perceived threat of danger, it's future-oriented, and it is mostly language-based. So I know that I said it is a chain of thoughts or images, but most of the times worrying involves some kind of monologue going through our minds. It is burdened with negative affects. So we might, repeatedly go through the last party that we had so much pleasant experiences in it, but it's not called worry. Worry is hardly controllable. And this is important. It's attempts at problem solving. So it is something that we usually do in the hope of reaching to a better solution. But these attempts are mostly unsuccessful. Why? Because on one hand, they promote avoidance. When we go through a series of worst case scenarios, it produces so much fear that we prefer to avoid the problem and just deal with it in our minds. So, although worrying is a normal process, almost the majority of people do it. its excessive form is a common feature of anxiety disorders. How does excessive worrying perpetuate anxiety? Well, first of all, it focuses our attention only on possible negative outcomes. So, in reality, the scenarios that might happen to us are a mixture of good outcomes and bad outcomes. And even the bad outcomes themselves have a different degree of, threat in them. But while we worry excessively, we catastrophize. We just say, what if I lose my job over it? What if I lose my job and cannot find another job? What if I lose my house? What if I lose everything I have and end up homeless and addicted and really miserable? So, as you see, it goes into worse and worse scenarios. And since dealing with these worst case scenarios is really frightening, it might lead to avoidance. Okay, so let's see an example of the cycle of worry in, our situation. We are all in a stressful situation. We hear lots of pandemic news. We might be lonelier than before because of the physical distancing rules and laws. And many of us lack emotional support because our dear ones have, their own problems and difficulties. All this produces anxiety and physiological consequences of chronic stress, which include fatigue, weakened immune system, and things like that. In this situation, we worry about the possibility of contracting coronavirus disease. That leads to focused attention on bodily sensations like fatigue, body ache, and these kind of things. It produces increased stress, so our immune systems become weaker and weaker, and then we might contract common cold, as we have, contracted common cold every year at this time of the year. But we are seeing our symptoms from a negative, catastrophizing approach. We catastrophize the symptoms. We think maybe I am having the coronavirus disease. We think about the worst case scenarios. So we think that not only I have the disease, but my lungs might be, going under a lot of problems, and I might need to go to emergency rooms. I might go under ventilators. So more and more anxiety when we are sick, we are having a cold, and more symptoms. And this vicious cycle just overwhelms us. Now that we have gone and we have reviewed worry, let's talk about cognitive distortion. A simple definition of cognitive distortion is inaccurate ways of thinking that usually lend themselves into keeping our erroneous negative beliefs about ourselves, our world, and our future, and reinforce our difficult or painful emotions. Cognitive distortions play an important role in producing and exacerbating fear and anxiety. So let's go through the characteristics of cognitive distortions one by one. First of all, they are systematic patterns of thinking. So they are not some random thoughts that sometimes are negative. No, they are some kind of systematic patterns that are biased and distort the information. They reinforce negative core beliefs. And what do I mean by core beliefs? Core beliefs are the basic beliefs we held really dear and we do not question ever about ourselves, other people, and our future. And these basic core beliefs have usually been with us since childhood. So, these systematic patterns of biased thinking increase negative emotions. They are not objective, they are not realistic, and they lead to fear, anxiety, depression, irritation, and other negative consequences. I found these pictures on a website, and I find them really interesting because uh, we can remember these pictures and know what are the cognitive distortions. So if you pay attention to the first picture, it shows how sometimes we filter information like we have a dark sunglass in front of our eyes. No matter how sunny the day is, what we see, what we perceive, is a gloomy situation. The second one referred to the black or white thinking. So sometimes we see things and we think, if I'm not perfect, I'm a total failure. If I didn't get A plus, I'm a loser. If my friend did not support me in the way that I wished, she is not my friend at all. There are other kinds of cognitive distortions. You can see, for example, blaming, only looking to put blame on someone. You can see labeling, calling ourselves or others idiot, jerk, poser. We can see entitlement. We think that we are always right, and many other cognitive distortions. There's a long list of cognitive distortions that lead to emotional difficulties, but today we are only going to talk about those who contribute to the fear of unknown. The most important one, catastrophizing. Catastrophizing means creating worst-case scenarios. It means imagining the worst possible outcome. For example, if I have some minor difficulties in my studies, I might say, well, I will not pass the exam. And if I do not pass the exam, I will never be able to graduate. And if I do not graduate, I cannot find a job. And if I cannot find a job, I will end up homeless. The next common cognitive distortion is overgeneralization. Overgeneralization means, for example, I have a problem in math, and then I generalize it to all subject courses. Or for example, I have a few conflicts with my sister, and I generalize it to all my relationships. The other one, arbitrary inference, means jumping to conclusions. So, if my friend didn't smile back when I told him that joke, maybe he's tired of being with me. And personalization. So today our colleague does not feel well, and we think that it is due to something that we have done. We do not think that it might be due to fatigue or some other problem at his or her house, or even about the work. We think that we are the cause of most problems that we see in the world. Now that you have some understanding of cognitive distortions, let's move on to avoidance and its role in the perpetuation of fear. So, what is avoidance? Avoidance means any mental or behavioral process that helps us not face the problem and instead work on anything else. So it's natural that we want to avoid some problem, especially when it is difficult to solve. But when we avoid the problem, it stays unsolved. And then when times go by, it might become more and more complicated. So we still have our problem, we have lost some time, and there might be some additional problems now. Most of us know that avoiding the problem is not a good way of going through our lives. But the problem is that avoidance can have so many faces. It can really kind of deceive us. For example, sometimes we don't think that we are avoiding. We are just thinking, I'm going to sleep, or I'm just going to check my emails, or I'm just going to post this on Facebook. Sometimes we outright deny that we are in a problem. We say, it's not a problem at all for me. Or, no, that's not my problem. It's my colleague's problem. Sometimes not letting ourselves feeling our emotions is a way to avoid the problem. So we accept that there's some problem outside, but we do not accept that we have some feelings about it. And in more serious cases, we might go extra lengths, we might use alcohol and drugs to avoid facing our problems. Now that I have introduced the 3 habits that keep us in anxiety and fear, let's see what research literature says. Fear of unknown, or the related more academic concept of uncertainty intolerance, is a common transdiagnostic risk for many emotional disorders, including generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and obsessive compulsive disorder. It's good to know that researchers have found cognitive behavioral techniques can decrease uncertainty intolerance. A review of different well-designed studies, I think more than 45 studies, revealed that exposure and cognitive restructuring are both effective strategies to treat different kinds of anxiety disorders. And we can choose either. Their efficacy is not significantly different. Okay, what are the techniques that we can learn about managing fear of unknown? What are these cognitive behavioral strategies to deal with anxiety and fear of unknown? First of all, I'm going to review some strategies and then some more specific exercises to reduce worry. First of all, let's see the broad strategies. We can change the framing of the problem in order to reduce the worry. So, what do we mean by changing the framing of the problem? Many of us, when we encounter a difficulty, we see it as a disaster, as a barrier. But if we can see them as challenges that help us grow, help us improve our skills, helps us become a more skilled and wiser person, instead of being avoidant, we might be enthusiastic to work with the problem. After that, as I said before, worrying is usually an unsuccessful attempt at problem solving. So, if we create a more flexible and effective problem solving strategy, and if we become skilled in using these other problem solving strategies, we don't need to worry. And the third strategy is enhancing confidence in our own problem solving skills. In order to enhance confidence, There are lots of things that we can do. First of all, prepare and become more skilled at problem solving. So we can read about different problem solving strategies, we can practice them, we can go to workshops and online courses, and so on. We can also be more realistic in our appraisal of our abilities. So some people just do not acknowledge their skills. Enhancing confidence means letting go of perfectionism and encouraging ourselves for our successes and accepting ourselves for our effective problem solvings. Other strategies include exposure, because many of times worry keeps us in our head. When we expose ourselves to the problem in the external world, we see that there are ways to deal with it. But when we are only in our head, we think that it's impossible to go over this problem. Another one is disengagement from pursuing unachievable goals. So, for example, think that last year you thought that you are going to visit 3 countries in 2020. Okay, you couldn't possibly expect that in 2020 there will be a pandemic and you cannot go on a vacation. If you disengage from pursuing this unachievable goal and instead try to make some more realistic goals now, it might help you reduce worry. Another really important concept and strategy to enhance our well-being is acceptance. And acceptance is not just a skill, it's a worldview, it's an approach to life. Acceptance means not denying the reality. Accepting means accepting the outside world as it is today, accepting the reality of it, and accepting yourself the way you are today. So we can plan to change our habits or change the world in the future. But the first step is to accept what is right now. These 6 things that I talked about are broad strategies. Now I'm going to give you some exercises that help reduce the worries. So you can integrate these exercises into your daily routine, and after a short time of persisting in doing them, you can see really significant results. First one is selecting a 20-minute worry time. And it's called paradoxical timetables because it's a paradox. We want to reduce the worries, but we are going to commit to have a worry time. How we do this exercise? First of all, monitor your worrying. Try to find out the cues that show you are starting the worrying cycle. Then, when you catch yourself worrying, postpone it to the worry time. Go back to the task at hand, and when you are at your worry time, try to worry as intense as possible. Try to worry more and more. I know it sounds crazy. I want to reduce my worries. Why should I try to worry more? But one aspect of worrying that is problematic is that it is perceived to be uncontrollable. So, when you commit to worry in a time that you have chosen, and you try to worry in a more intense manner, it gives you some control over worrying. Another exercise is writing the worries down. So, when we worry, when we try to solve the problems in our head, we go over it again and again and again. Because in a state of anxiety, we do not trust our memories. That's completely natural. We want to repeat it so that it sticks in our mind, but the repetition itself exacerbates the anxiety. When we write down the worries, okay, we are not going to forget them because we have them on the paper. After writing down the worries, go and examine the evidences. Estimate how likely is the threat you predict. How likely is the worst case scenario that you predict? Explore what are the most likely scenarios. And if the most likely scenarios are still problematic for you, are still threatening, make plans to be ready for these scenarios. So, some of you might say, but I do not want to reduce the worries. I think that's a habit that is, helping me be more prepared, helping me be more motivated. If you think like this, you can do this exercise. Evaluate the cost and benefits of worrying and compare it to the cost and benefits of writing down your problem and trying to solve it in a more objective way. There are other exercises, for example, exploring the worst case scenario and thinking how ready you are to cope with it. After all, it is our skills and our emotional regulation skills that help us overcome the difficulties even when they are really, really big. Okay, now that I have told you a few strategies and exercises to overcome the worrying, let's talk about cognitive restructuring. And cognitive restructuring is an, academic word for what we do in CBT, cognitive-behavioral therapy. So it's a psychotherapeutic process. It involves learning new sets of skills. And these skills include identifying unrealistic or maladaptive thoughts, challenging and disputing them, and then creating more realistic and adaptive thoughts as an alternative way of thinking. I'm going to give you an understanding of how cognitive restructuring works. But first of all, I should warn you. If your anxiety seems overwhelming or if you are depressed, please contact a professional counselor or psychotherapist. Do not try to solve it on yourself because failing at it might increase your negative emotions. Now let's go back to the cognitive restructuring. A simple way of doing it is like this. Write down the situation elaboratively and as objectively as possible. So write when, where, with whom, what happened. Write down your feelings and emotions. You may become surprised how many emotions you can have at the same time. Then, write down what goes through your mind that could create those emotions. For example, yesterday I was grocery shopping with my friend, and then she felt tired, and I was thinking, oh gosh, I'm not a good friend. I didn't support her. So, in this example, I might feel shame and guilt because I think that I was not as supportive as I could be. This is a really neutral, benign situation, but still the way I think about it creates some emotions. For example, if I had thought that, gosh, how slow she is. Then, instead of feeling shame and guilt, I might have felt anger and irritation. So, I only want to tell you what goes through our mind create emotions. It's not the only resource that creates the emotions, but it's a very important factor that contributes to our emotions. Then, when you wrote your thoughts, read them and see if there is any kind of cognitive distortions, such as catastrophizing, personalization, or black and white thinking. Then, explore the evidences. Challenge and dispute unrealistic or distorted thought patterns. And then replace unrealistic or maladaptive thoughts with more realistic alternatives. And then whenever you found out that the danger is real, get proactively prepared for realistic and probable danger. Okay, a quick recap. Examining the situation, use WH questions, what happened, when, where, with whom. And do not include your interpretations of the situation, just the objective facts. Explore the feelings, name the emotions. If you do not have enough words for emotions, you can look at this picture. Try to explore how you feel that emotion in your body. For example, if you are anxious, you might feel tense in your shoulders, you might feel tight in your chest, you might feel that your hands are cold, you might feel that you feel some kind of uncomfortable in your belly. And then rate the emotion on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 means you have no emotion at all, and 10 means you have that emotions in the most intense way possible. Identify thoughts and mental images. Some of the most common thoughts is things like I can't, it's impossible, it's terrible. Write down what is going through your mind. Rate how much you believe that thought on a scale of 0 to 10. Describe mental images and identify how each one of these thoughts or images make you feel. So now you want to dispute your thoughts. Identify cognitive distortions. Am I overestimating danger? Am I catastrophizing? Am I falling into a thinking trap? Gather information. Is this a fact or does it sound more like a false belief? Is this a possibility or a certainty? What's the worst thing that can happen? Examine evidences, and you can ask your friends to help you with this, because most of the times we do not pay attention to the evidences that are contrary to our beliefs. And then explore cost and benefits of your way of thinking. And the last step is getting proactively prepared for realistic and probable dangers, increasing your knowledge, researching, enhancing your skills, practicing, and practicing. The third technique that therapists use in CBT is exposure to fear stimuli. So we just want to change avoidant patterns of behavior with gradual exposure. There are many different exposure techniques, from systematic desensitization to flooding to exposure and prevention of response. And gradual exposure means that we do not overwhelm ourselves or our clients. So in order to move in a way that do not overwhelm us, first we create an anxiety hierarchy. Anxiety hierarchy is a list of situations or events that produce anxiety and rating them on a scale so we can find out which one is the least feared situation and which one is the worst. Then we create some calm and relaxation using other exercises, for example, progressive muscle relaxation or mindfulness. In this way, when we face the situation that produces anxiety, we are prepared to be more calm. Then we stay at the presence of the feared stimuli for as long as it is needed, so we kind of become desensitized, which means that we are not afraid of that stimuli any longer. Then we move to the next item in our list. So, for example, if we are afraid of driving, at first we might imagine ourselves in our car. And we do this again and again and again until imagining ourselves in the car do not produce any fear. And we move to going and just sitting in the car. And we practice this over and over until sitting in the car does not make us afraid. In the next item, we just turn on the engine and we move 10 meters. So I think that you have got understanding of what is gradual exposure. Now we have reached the last part of today's webinar. So we have been focused on how to deal with fear and anxiety and mental processes that produce fear and anxiety. But in this last section, I want to talk about contradictory approach to life. As I told you in the first few slides, in order to have a balanced motivation to explore and be cautious, we have two intrinsic motivations, fear and curiosity. Curiosity helps us be open to change and embrace the unknown. And the fun part is that when we are curious, it somehow deactivates the fear response. In our ancestors' lives, fear was a really valuable survival heritage because we were dealing with life or death. But in our days, in our modern life, curiosity is a better approach that helps us explore more, be adventurous, and improve our skills. So how can we be curious? Try to see the world as a treasure island. I don't know if you have read the book or you have seen one of the movies and animations that have been based on that treasure island book. But when we imagine the world as a treasure island, we see the barriers as challenges that we need to overcome so that we can find what we really desire. In this way, we are enthusiastic to go on, we are enthusiastic to explore and to find out the next step. Or if you do not like the treasure island, just think of it as a video game. In video games, we are really eager to go on to the next step and be faced with more monsters, more difficult objects, more difficult barriers, because we know that from going to another level, another stage, we have become wiser, we have become more skilled. It's good to know that curiosity activates the brain's reward circuit. So the same circuit that when we eat a chocolate or when we are acknowledged for success, it gives us pleasure. Curiosity gives us the same pleasure. A lot of researchers have found out that curiosity improves the memory. So when learning, approaching the material in a curious way helps us learn more and keep that in our mind for a longer time. So again, what should we do? We should frame a noun as a challenge to grow. And we try to find the optimum levels of challenge. There is a state of mind that researchers do a lot of investigation around. It's called flow state of mind. It's a really pleasant feeling that we have when we lose track of time and place because we are so deeply concentrated on the task that we do not pay attention to anything else. And this flow state is when the challenge is optimal. We are challenged, but we have skills. So I invite you to try to find out the challenges to enhance your skills and get the reward of flow state. Thank you for being with us for about an hour, and please share with us any thoughts or comments you have. Again, this is Fatemeh from Mind by Design Clinic, and I wish you a prosperous, meaningful life.
Hello, hello. We have saved the best for last. As many of you may know, we have so many incredible courses coming up for 2021 in so many diverse topics for everyone. And so one person in our audience today will be chosen randomly to actually participate in any 2 courses for 2021 of their choice for free. If you register for the newsletter, you actually get entered again. So double your chances, double your fun. And I thank you so much for participating with us in this beautiful journey. I am so proud and thankful to have been able to offer this to everyone. To all of you, have a wonderful end of year, and I will see you next year.